Today, viewing art is now more accessible, and we can see the works of different artists that we may not be able to see in traditional closed art galleries or mainstream media. Art allows artists to convey a message they want to share to whoever views their art and be able to express themselves freely. The visual arts can bring about a sense of community and belonging for those who are struggling with, coming to terms to, or expressing their sexual or gender identity. There are hundreds of thousands of pieces of artwork by queer Hispanic artists that range from photography, drawings, paintings to performances and cinema. Let's take a look at some queer Hispanic artists and how their work impacted their communities and how they were able to overcome any hardships. Family, culture, and community have a large influence and impact on the works of queer Hispanic artists, and it can be seen by the use of cultural symbols and icons used in some of the artists' work. Because the culture is highly influenced by religion, display of homosexuality was highly discriminated against, censored, and generally not accepted. Along with the family dynamic, men and women were expected to marry the opposite sex and intend to continue the family tree, so those expressing homosexuality was generally unaccepted by family and community. Though one way that community was a positive influence on artists was the use of art schools and allowed for some artists to find a community with other queer Hispanic artists. Joey Terrell is a gay Chicano artist from East Los Angeles, and he has had several exhibits and shows across the Los Angeles area. Terrell is also known for his work as an advocate for the gay and lesbian movements, as well as an advocate for the AIDS awareness movement. One of his most noticeable works is Homeboy Beautiful. Homeboy Beautiful was founded and created by Joey Terrell, and it ran from 1978 to 1979. Homeboy Beautiful was a series of magazine-like art pieces that were formatted and designed in a way to mimic and mock the way homemaking magazines were popular during the time. Homeboy is a label for those that are gang-affiliated or Chicanos that have internalized homophobia and are still hiding and denying their sexuality. Many of which display the machismo standards this identity allow homosexual Chicano men pass as heterosexual. Homeboy Beautiful, though only having 2 editions, was significant in the lives of homosexual and queer Chicanos in a community that is dominated by white homosexual men. Terrell talks about his work in Homeboy Beautiful as he wanted gay Chicanos to be able to see themselves in mainstream pop culture. In the first issue, it had images and written pieces by Terrell's alter ego. As a reporter, he shared images and described how homo homeboys interacted and behaved during these homo homeboy underground parties. While the second issue provided an outlet for homeboys themselves to represent themselves, as they felt exposed and not represented fairly in the first issue. Though there was only 100 copies of each volume made, its impact was much larger than expected. Here are words from Joey Terrell himself about his work in Homeboy Beautiful.
Joey Terrell, and I'm an artist, and I'm a native Angelino, second generation, and Chicano, and Homeboy Beautiful magazine back in 1978. And I should start off by saying that it was always considered an art project, not a magazine that was going to be sustained or like with subscriptions or ongoing. Well, like a lot of Chicano artists, we were always concerned with making art about our identities, and for me, it was about my sexual identity as well as being Chicano. And in the 70s, there was a Chicano art scene, but it was sort of ignored or by the overall art infrastructure and the museums and galleries. And so we had our own world. Edition of 100 each, and they were sold at a couple of independent bookstores here in Los Angeles, Chatterton's Books, and the Soap Plant in Silver Lake. So, and that's what we did. And in the second issue, I also had an article about some homeboys who were upset about the first issue. They felt that the photo essay was exploitive of them, and so they take over the editorial offices of Homeboy Beautiful magazine and demand that we represent them with their voices, their culture, their poetry, their art.
Laura Aguilera was a lesbian Chicano photographer whose work was centered around providing visual representation of marginalized groups of people, not only Hispanic LGBTQ+ people, but those also experiencing obesity. Some of her most known work are the Plush Pony series, Latina Lesbians, and Clothed Unclothed. Many of her self-portraits were nude, as to help Aguilar come to terms with her own sexual identity, her body, gender, and more. Aguilar photographed herself nude as a way to combat the male gaze on nude women that was prevalent in Western art culture. She was not recognized by mainstream media, as her work was seen as radical in how she made her nude body so visible. One of her most famous photographs is the three eagles flying, visualizing the struggle of Chicano and Chicana people who struggled living between two different cultures. The Latina Lesbian series ran from 1986 to 1990, and this photography series centered around successful Latina lesbians about their sexual and gender identity along with their portraits. The Plush Pony series in 1992 centered around the group of working-class lesbians in the Plush Pony Bar in California. Aguilar was also involved in AIDS awareness groups and other organizations for queer Latinx artists. Due to complications with diabetes, Aguilar died at the age of 58. Films and cinema is one of the most accessible ways of finding visual representation for LGBTQ+ Hispanic people. Works ranging from independent productions to major productions, queer Hispanics are able to witness stories and visuals of themselves on screen that they otherwise would not have seen in mainstream films. Julian Hernandez is a gay filmmaker and director, and he was expelled from the National School of Film Arts as he made homosexual films during a homophobic school administration. Today, Hernandez is recognized as an award-winning filmmaker for his short films surrounding homosexual love stories and relationships. One of his movies, Raging Sun, Raging Sky, won Best Feature Film at the Berlin International Film Festival in 2009. The movie follows the story of two male lovers in a journey to find each other again, coursing through life, death, resurrection, and love. One event in 1997 showed how a community of queer artists and allies found the strength to share their art and their experiences even under the threat of silence. The Esperanza Peace and Justice Center is an organization that centers its mission of using both cultural and traditional Hispanic arts to raise awareness and support for marginalized groups of people, such as women, the LGBTQ+ community, and the working class community. The Queer Latino Cultural Organization's funding was cut by the City Council after a successful attempt by conservative groups. The reason for the city's decision to cut funding was that the artwork produced by the queer artists of the center were considered pornographic and were spreading the homosexual agenda. In the same year, members launched the Todos Somos Esperanza campaign in response to the funding cuts. Several events were set up, including public screenings of gay and lesbian movies, a series of panels, dances, plays, and readings, and also a traveling theater group performing in front of churches, plazas, parties, and concerts. The campaign was successful in getting support from people from all different backgrounds and ages across the United States. It wasn't until 3 years later where a trial was brought forth, Judge Orlando Garcia stating that the city had violated the First Amendment rights of the Esperanza group. The trial lasted until May 15, 2001, when Judge Garcia found that the city was violating the rights of the Esperanza group. The city consented to providing monetary damages and also continuing to fund the organization. According to Esperanza, this is the first case in the United States addressing issues of race and ethnicity in public arts funding. The case challenges the United States' long-standing resistance to recognition of cultural arts and establishes a foothold for further work to strengthen the cultural rights of indigenous and minority communities. Due to the rise of dictatorships in Latin America in the 1960s to 1980s, mail art was one of the best ways for isolated artists to communicate with other artists and other people during this. Most of the male artists did not know each other personally, but they were able to establish emotional relationships and friendships. Some of the art was sent anonymously or not. However, because of the increase of male art, censorship became more intense and strict, and it led to the arrest of several queer artists. Grant, who is still active today, was heavily involved in the male art movement, exchanging art with his friends and also collaborators and other artists. Grant integrated his sexuality into his artwork, not only in his male art, he also did it in murals and large-scale paintings. Another prominent male artist was Teddy Sandoval, and his work included male art, photography, performance, window displays, ceramics, paintings, and more. He heavily focused on the issues of community, sexuality, and ethnic identity, he used symbols and icons that were mostly associated with the rich cultures of Mexico's and Chicanos and Chicanas. He created mail art signed with Teddy, or also his drag name Rosa, and his art circulated nationally and internationally during the mail art movement. The AIDS crisis of the 1980s to 1990s casted a negative stigma against LGBTQ+ people, especially gay men. Increased homophobia, use of slurs, and calling AIDS the gay disease has made it hard for queer people to be able to freely express themselves without feeling judged or stigmatized. According to the CDC, Hispanic and Latino men who reported to have male-to-male sexual contact were severely affected by HIV, making up 27% of the almost 38,000 new HIV diagnoses in 2018. Mundo was a gay Hispanic artist most known for his large-scale paintings and self-portraits. His most notable work were made for awareness of AIDS, depicting the feelings and experiences as a gay man affected with AIDS. This type of artwork was known as abstracted action, as a way to bring awareness to the disease during the AIDS crisis. Unfortunately, due to the complications of AIDS, Meza died at only the age of 30. Not only was Joey Terrell influential in the representation of gay Chicano men, he also illustrated and wrote another series of comics that included instructions and guides to practicing safe sex. It was intended to combat negative stereotypes and stigma against LGBTQ+ people, especially gay men, and it was used to promote the stigma of safe sex. There was 4 volumes made, and it was free and available to any Chicanos that were at risk of infections. It was intended to use as a resource for those that do not have accessible information and aid, and it also created artwork and kits for safe sex. Art allowed queer Hispanic artists an outlet to express themselves. It not only impacted the relationship of their own sexuality and gender identity, but also impacted their community. It helped bring in another perspective and sheds a light into the lives of these artists and how their environment helped influence their work.